All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the CCG webinar workshop series. Thank you for joining us. Today's presenter is Mark Ross, co-founder at GridMarkets. GridMarkets and CCG have been working as partners since 2019 to integrate the GridMarkets services into our Mo modeling software. Just quickly, my name is Nicolas Ayot, scientific software developer at CCG, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A window to type in your questions. You can open the Q&A window by clicking on the Q&A option located in the menu below your Zoom screen. Only myself and the speaker will be able to see your questions. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar, but if we're unable to answer your questions at that time, we will contact you subsequently. Access to a recording of this webinar will be available in the next 7 days, and we'll send an email to everyone who participated in this webinar to let them know when the video is actually available. So without any further delay, I'm delighted to introduce you to Mark Ross, who will present runs Mo securely on thousands of cores without license limitation. So Mark, you can take the screen. You are muted, Mark.
Sorry, yeah, there we go.
Yes, okay, cool.
Okay, super.
Sorry.
So you can see my screen, yeah? Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone who has joined today's webinar. Really appreciate you making the time. I'm Mark Ross. Excuse me. I'm Mark Ross, and I'm one of the co-founders of GridMarkets. Two of my GridMarkets colleagues are on the call with us today. Doyle Oki and Keith Thrope is on the line as well, and my Oracle colleague Ben, who you'll hear from a little bit later in the presentation, is also on the line. So let's talk a little bit about what GridMarkets is to acquaint you with the company. Firstly, our mission. Our mission is to accelerate creativity, and we do this by simplifying and parallelizing computationally demanding workflows. There's two areas of focus that we work on. One is molecular simulations, and we'll be talking a lot about that today. We support Mo and Amber and NEMD GROMACS, and we've got some additional things in the works to come. The other area of our focus is in VFX simulations. Excuse me, and there we do work for companies that you probably know well: Fox, Pepsi, BBC, Electronic Arts, and many others. What is a VFX simulation? I thought I'd share some examples for you. So VFX simulations are basically simulating real world things. Here we're simulating fire. The previous was simulating the flow of water. They're very computationally demanding. And here's a very interesting destruction simulation. But the platform supports these very computationally demanding workflows, and in this case for media and entertainment companies. Back to GridMarkets, we have offices around the world, so we're able to provide 24/7 support to our customers. And we have some very strategic partnerships, one of them obviously being with the Chemical Computing Group, and the other with Oracle, which you'll be learning a little more about. And we have several others, UCSS, and excuse me, on the media side, we have a number of relationships that are very important to us with Pixar and Maxon and others. If you want to learn more about GridMarkets, Forbes did an interesting article on GridMarkets. You can go to this link here, bit.ly at -GM-Forbes, and you'll learn more about both our pharma and our media offering. So thought I'd give you a kind of an explanation in a nutshell of our service. To set up, it's very simple, takes 3 steps. I'll be going through that with you today. In the case of Mo, you can submit directly from the Mo user interface. Don't have to leave it. So very convenient. See that in a moment. And you can scale. You can scale both the number of tokens, the number of machines. We provide the tokens, which you'll learn more about in a moment. And you can also scale by submitting multiple simulations in parallel. Excuse me. The service is a pay-as-you-go service, so you only pay for what you use for the time that you've used it. And our model is an all-inclusive payment model, so you pay for effectively the number of machine seconds that you consume. There's no minimum, just we count the number of machine seconds and we charge you by a machine second factor. And also importantly, the platform is very secure. It's powered by and secured by the Oracle Cloud, which Ben is going to be talking a little bit about coming up. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about how the service works. It starts by installing a tool called Envoy, which we have created. And Envoy is responsible for moving your files from your local machine to our cloud and moving the results back from our cloud to your local machine. In that Envoy plugin is also an SVL, which allows you then to integrate that into Mo. And that's how you can launch directly from Mo to GridMarkets using that SVL plugin. Once you have set up Mo and have installed the SVL plugin, it's then a matter of deciding how many machines you want to run on. You can run on from 1 to 100 or more if you need concurrently. And those machines are 32 threads with 64 gigs of memory. After your project has been prepared, you then upload your files via the Envoy tool that I mentioned, and you submit via the SVL plugin. We also, by the way, support a command line interface submission if you prefer that route. So either of those two ways allow you to get your job to us, and then we can start processing it from there. This is what it looks like. This is the interface that you use to specify the job submission parameters, your project directory, and various other parameters that we will then receive and use to run your job. So the next step after you've specified the job is for Envoy to upload it. That happens automatically in the background. And this is what the uploading screen looks like. So you can see several, in this case, 4 examples of uploads and the status of them. The blue means that the upload was completed, and the green means the upload is in progress, and you can keep track of how many files you've uploaded and what the status of each of them is, total size of the uploads, and so on. Once the project is in our cloud, that's when we start allocating the tokens. So if you've asked for 10 machines to run concurrently or 100 machines to run concurrently, it's at that moment that we allocate those 10 Mo tokens or those 100 Mo tokens, whatever the number of machines is, we then allocate the appropriate number of Mo tokens. And this is done dynamically. And this is done without any use of your local tokens. So however many local tokens you have, it's irrelevant because we spin those up dynamically and support your submission that way. Excuse me. After the upload has been completed and we start running your job, we then send real-time updates back to you. And that's done via the Envoy interface. And here's what that looks like. So you get real-time information about the running job, or if you have run several jobs simultaneously, the status of those running jobs. In this case, there's one job that is running, and you can see the green status there, and there's another job that's waiting. So through this interface, you're able to pause your jobs or restart your jobs. So you have job control, and also you can interrogate all the way down to the logs of any given submission, which here's an example of what that looks like. So if you need to look at what the logs are that Mo has produced, that view is available via Envoy as well. Now that your job has been submitted and you have run it to completion, we then send the results back to you. Here again, this is Envoy's job. Envoy will do this automatically in the background, so you don't have to wait. You can, in fact, you can close your machine if you wanted to while this is all happening. It's not required for your machine to be running. And then Envoy will download your results to whatever the designated folder is that you identified during submission time. So that designated folder could be some local to your local machine, or it could be a cloud storage location. Whatever you specify, that's where we will securely download your results to. And this is what the downloading screen looks like. So here again, you have, you're able to see what is downloaded and what the status of that download is. Sorry. So let's talk about how GridMarkets compares to the other options that you have. And in this analysis that follows, I picked three of the major options you have. Obviously, one of them is the GridMarkets option. The other two would be to build a local cluster. And the last would be to create a Mo cluster effectively in the cloud using something like AWS, creating that cluster yourself, but the distinction being you'd be using cloud machines as opposed to your own local machines. So let's see how those compare. The first comparison is in the area of setup. If any of you have tried to set up your own local clusters, or even using an AWS cluster that you set up, it's very complicated. It takes many steps, and it also requires typically highly skilled people to do. Not an easy thing to do. It's obviously possible to do, but takes time. The local cluster obviously requires your own hardware and your own facilities. The advantage of AWS is you don't have to have your own facilities for the machines. In the case of GridMarkets, it's 3 steps, and I'll show you what those 3 steps are in a moment, but you can be up and running with GridMarkets in less than 5 minutes with no special skills required. The other interesting aspect of this is in the case of scaling the tokens. I've already mentioned what we do. You have access through GridMarkets effectively to unlimited tokens. Whereas in the case of the local cluster in AWS, you are dependent upon your local tokens. So your ability to scale is constrained typically by the number of tokens you have with the local cluster option and with the AWS option, whereas there is no limitation to scaling in the case of GridMarkets because we have access to unlimited tokens, and that's a consequence of our partnership with CCG. The other dimension here is scaling the machines. Obviously, if you have a local cluster, you're limited to the number of machines you have decided to put in that cluster. In the case of AWS, you're typically constrained by whatever your quota is with AWS. And in the case of GridMarkets, we provide as many machines as you need. So there's no constraint there. There's a number of cost-related issues and challenges for each of these. The setup cost for a local cluster is typically high, involves capital costs, creating the facilities if you don't already have it, hiring the people to maintain it. A lot of that goes away in the case of AWS because you're not babysitting the machines. You don't need a place to put those machines, obviously, but still it's a complex thing and requires special skills and maintenance of that solution. In the case of GridMarkets, there's no setup cost. It's free to set up. And as I said, it takes about 5 minutes to do so. And once you've set up, you're done. There's no cost for getting to that setup point in the case of GridMarkets. The maintenance of the local cluster is also a challenge, requires constant maintenance, patches, operating system upgrades, machines depreciate quickly. Whatever the size that you think your cluster is today, tomorrow that will be probably smaller than what you need. You're constantly potentially needing more capacity. And in the case of AWS, that problem is solved because you can scale with AWS, obviously. But there is a maintenance cost. It is admittedly much smaller than the local cluster cost, but compared to GridMarkets, there is no maintenance cost. You only pay for it when you use it. Then there's the usage costs. And in the case of the local cluster, it's predictable because you know what you have spent on your cluster. You may not necessarily know, for example, what your electric bill is going to be at the end of the month, but it's largely predictable. In the case of AWS, there are many costs which are charged, or you see the charge of at the end of the month, which includes data egress and data storage and the machine costs and so on. So you don't really know what you're paying for AWS until well after the fact, typically, as I say, at the end of the month. In the case of GridMarkets, it's very easy to predict what your costs are going to be. As I mentioned, we charge on a per second basis. And so you can estimate roughly what the number of seconds or number of machine hours you will require and multiply that by the machine hour cost factor. And you know ahead of time, within a reasonable range, what your actual costs with GridMarkets are going to be. So you can budget for it easily as well. And then lastly, the return on investment. In the case of a local cluster, if you're getting a 10 to 20% return on investment with your local cluster, that's pretty good. The utilization tends to be very spiky, and for local clusters, they sit idle for long periods of time, and so they're underutilized, which has a big impact on your ROI. AWS, obviously, there is some overhead there, so the return on investment is much better than a local cluster. But in the case of GridMarkets, you're effectively utilizing it, whenever you need, and so the ROI as a consequence is very high. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about security. I mentioned that one of our strategic partners is Oracle, and GridMarkets is built on top of the Oracle cloud. So when you run your Mo simulation with GridMarkets, you're actually running it on an Oracle machine in a secure Oracle data center. We've done a number of things with Oracle's help to ensure the security of our service, including making sure that there's no public access to nodes, IO devices are disabled, we encrypt data. And Ben is going to say a few words about how Oracle generally secures its platform. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ben. I think I can control the slides, but there you go, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Always great to be here talking about OCI and our tireless dedication to security. Again, my name is Ben Hill. I'm a global director in the Oracle for Startups program. We're an accelerator program that provides resources to entrepreneurs to help them launch successful businesses. I manage our global cloud architect team. So let's get into the details. So when Oracle went about launching our Generation 2 cloud offering, our approach to security was deliberate and direct. We wanted to ensure that it was architected in, automated, always on, and best of all, free. So how do we go about doing this? Let's go through some of the high points. More security by default. What exactly does that mean? Well, firstly, we designed for isolation. We've taken the hypervisor and put it on the network layer. In short, this approach separates customer traffic, which provides better security and performance. And as an added bonus, it reduces the risk of hypervisor-based attacks. Also, OCI has what's called separation of duty, which means Oracle admins have no access to a customer's memory space. And as it relates to your data and associated storage devices, we have a full encryption at rest and in motion by default, as well as integrated backups for business continuity and disaster recovery best practices. Now let's chat a little bit about our auto detection and remediation capabilities, specifically Oracle Cloud Guard and vulnerability scanning service. So Oracle Cloud Guard provides comprehensive end-to-end monitoring for your cloud environments by continuously collecting and analyzing service configurations, audit logs, and other information and reporting its findings as problems based on either out-of-the-box security recipes or custom security recipes created by the local admin. And to complement Oracle Cloud Guard, we have Oracle's vulnerability scanning service, which routinely checks hosts for potential vulnerabilities and generates detailed reports with metrics about potential weak points. And best of all, most security services are built in by default and free, like multi-factor authentication for user access, OCI Vault, which can be used to store passwords, SSH keys, and certificates. And OCI is open to third-party tools, so you can federate identity and access management policies with your organization's centralized identity provider, as well as SIEM systems like Splunk and Logarithm via APIs and SDKs. All right, Mark, I said my piece, and now back to you, sir.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, we're going to be wrapping it up soon, but I wanted to talk a little bit about pricing. There's two different options that we offer. One is what we call an on-demand model, and it's you pay for the machine hours that I mentioned. So you submit something, as you consume our service, you consume credits, GridMarkets credits, which you pay for in advance. And as your job is running, those credits are being consumed. And so you pay on effectively a machine hour basis for however many concurrent machines you are using at the time. The second pricing model is a weekly model. And you can think of the weekly model as a kind of a virtual temporary cluster. So we set up X number of machines for you, whatever you decide, and you use that for Y weeks, and you pay for that in a fixed cost. So you can use that cluster that we create for you as much or as little as you want for that period of time. And during that period of time, again, you get however many machines you have asked us for. So as an example, maybe you have some simulations that you want to run over a 2-week period or a 4-week period, and you want to use 10 or say 20 machines during that period. So you could sign up for a weekly pricing option for 2 weeks with 20 machines, and that would cost you a certain amount. And again, you wouldn't pay any more or any less than that amount, and you could use those, in this example, 20 machines for as much as you wanted to during that excuse me, during that 2-week period of time. 2 important points about our pricing. I've mentioned one of them already briefly, but the price is all inclusive. So there is no surprise invoice or charge at the end of the month with GridMarkets. Everything that you consume from us is paid for in the all-inclusive machine hour price. So the data storage, the data egress, the cost of in this case, the Mo tokens, the machine costs, everything is all wrapped up into that one machine hour price. So once your job is done, you know exactly how much it costs. And and as I said, you should be able to predict it as well, reasonably. And that's it. That's all you pay for. Once you stop using the service, the charges stop as well. There's no charge for after your submission stops. The other point, which is I think very interesting, for those of you who might have a Mo site license, or for those of you who are associated with academic institutions and/or maybe students, we offer an 80% discount on our service. So there, in a moment, you're going to see an email address, which we're going to provide. If you are in that category, if you already have a Mo site license, or if you're an academic or a student, contact us to acquire that 80% discount. Okay. Lastly, wanted to give you some important links if you're interested in pursuing any of what we've discussed today. You can visit our website. It's pharma.gridmarkets.com/Mo. I mentioned also that we support a few other services, GrowMax, Amber, and so on. And if you're interested in them, you can go to pharma.gridmarkets.com/Amber, for example, or whichever it is. Anyway, that's our website there. You can, excuse me, you can sign up and trial our service for free by going to pharma.gridmarkets.com/sign-up. When you do sign up, and if you're qualified, you will get $1,000 in free credits, which will allow you to more than kick the tires on our machine, on our service, excuse me. You'll be able to submit a number of simulations to us, get a really good feel for the workflow that I've described to you today in words, and really see for yourself what the service is like. Excuse me. So we encourage you to do that. Again, it's free, and we give you a trial, a pretty healthy trial period to go along with that. If you have any questions, you can email us at pharma@gridmarkets.com. And if you're interested in meeting us, we have a Calendly link, which you see there in number 4. Feel free to set up a time with us. We'd be happy to meet with you and give you a demo, or to answer any questions. I'm sure there's probably detailed questions you might have, which if we don't get through today, we'd be happy to chat with you about in an introductory call. So that's all we have today. And thanks again for your time. I think there's probably some questions now. So Nick, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I think I'm sharing my screen correctly. So this is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, Mark Ross, and thank you all for joining us. If you have any additional questions or ideas for future webinar topics, please do not hesitate to email us at support.chemcom.com or to email GridMarkets, the email they just shown in the presentation. As mentioned earlier, within the next 7 days, you'll receive an email notification with details on how to access the video recording of this webinar. So now I'll take a few questions and I'll ask them to Mark Ross or to whomever on the GridMarkets team is the most competent to answer the question. So here's one. We have limited technical skills on staff. Do you help us to set up the GridMarkets service?
Yes, that's a great question. Thanks, Nick, and whoever offered that. The answer is yes, we will help you to set up your service, but also, as I mentioned, it's super simple. And literally, it will take a couple minutes to download the Envoy plugin that I mentioned and get it set up and running. There are a few nuances with setting that up, and so yes, would be very happy to help you do so. But once it's set up, you're good to go, and you should be able to submit very easily. So if you have any setup questions, give us a shout at that email address if you'd like, and we'd be able to help you.
All right. We are a CRO with a number of ComCams on staff and various projects underway at any time. Do we need an account for each staff member, each project, or how does this work for the license?
Yeah, so there's a number of options for you. You can have as many accounts as you want. So you can create a GridMarkets account for each of your computational chemists if you choose. The other option is we can create think of it as like an umbrella account. And underneath there can be individual accounts for whoever you would like to use the GridMarkets service. From the umbrella account, you can then allocate credits to the people who are on your staff, so you can control their spending that way, for example. So either of those options are available. And as I said, if you have any questions about how to set up your specific environment, the number of accounts that might be best for you, or what those options are, would be happy to share our experience with that and advise you on what might be best for you. So there's there's flexibility there, in short.
All right, I think we'll take one last one. Let me see. Some services like OpenEye or Schrodinger require upfront licensing fees to use their platform. What is the GridMarkets upfront fee?
Yeah, so this is an area that we think we distinguish ourselves from the alternatives. There is no upfront fee. So to stress, you pay only for what you use. You don't have to pay a very large access fee or anything of the sort. So the process, again, to reiterate, is you simply sign up, use your free account, use your free credits to kick the tires on our service. And then when you're ready, you submit a job, and the charges only begin once you have successfully submitted and the job runs. And that's it. So no setup charges at all.
All right. Well, thank you again. It's 11:30, so it is all the time we had for today. And if we haven't answered your question, like I said, we will get back to you via email. We are taking notes of the questions that remain in the Q&A section. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you, Mark Ross and the GridMarkets team. And have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.